I mentioned to you yesterday that it's important, the real authority of a Talmid Chacham is through his capacity, his ability, his skills at understanding Gemara, at learning Gemara. In Lomdus, we talked about how Reb Zundel Salant, the great holy Baal Musa, Reb Zundel Salant, was the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. One has to always remember that people weren't just great in Musar or in Hashkafa, they were great in every area of Torah, including Lomdus. One of the important skills that one develops through learning Gemara in the right way and learning deeply is the skill to be mechalek, to understand distinctions between very narrow distinctions, things that look identical, ideas that look identical, and to understand inherently they're actually different. And that's where a lot of the mistakes come into being, where people assume it says A and therefore B. You know that the halakha is a situation in case A, so surely it's the same in case B, without always being able to understand how to distinguish between those two cases. There's also an equally important skill of being able to understand that things that look different are actually at their essence are actually one idea. That ability to be mavchin, to be mechalik, that's an important part that we get through learning. But that capacity to understand avchana, as we're going to learn today, is not only a mental skill. That's not just a skill you get from learning in terms of learning how to do it. It's a skill of character. It's a skill of being. That you need to be a certain type of person. You need to be an Adam Kodesh. You need to have a measure of actual Kedusha in oneself in order to be able to understand those very fine chilukim, those very fine differences that enable one to paskin a halacha, to be able to create a situation of halacha, to understand the differences between situations, the differences between people, the differences between concepts and ideas, differences in times and era, just being able to clearly understand those differences. We'll get to a deeper understanding of what that is and why character, kedushat haneshama, the sanctity of a person's neshama, is part of his learning process. And that's why it can't be that just any Tom, Dick and Harry has an opinion on Torah and a view on Torah. And if he's quoting other people, that's fine. But if he's giving his own ideas, who is this person? What is their authority? Authority both in knowledge and skills and authority in character. Who are they? It becomes really important to understand. Discernment, Benan Shel Kedoshim and Avodah Zarah Daf Nun with Aleph. We have a really interesting Gemara that takes us into all sorts of routes. We'll only be able to follow one or two of them. The story is that Beyanai Malka Charuv, the house, the palace of Yanai the king, was destroyed. Yanai wasn't a very nice king. He was descendant of the Chashmonaim, and his palace became a ruin. Atu Ovdei Kechovi Makimu Be Markulis, the idolaters came, and from the stones of the palace they built a markulis. Markulis is an avodah zarah, it's an idol that is a pile of stones. That's what the markulis is, and you serve it by throwing more stones onto it. Other non-Jewish people who don't serve markulis, they took those stones from the idol of markulis and they paved the streets with them. Some rabbis used those roads and some did not. So said Rabbi Yochanan, Benan shel Kedoshim mahalech aleim va'ana nifrosh mehem. The sons of holy ones, Benan shel Kedoshim, use that road. Are we not going to use that? One has to be careful. Sometimes one adds a chumrah. To add a chumrah when there were great people who didn't practice that chumrah is also not okay. You've got to give kavod and understand if they're great people that used to behave in a certain way, for you to come and be more religious than them and do we don't do that, provided one understands the halachas clearly. So the Rabbi Yochanan says, Benan shel Kedoshim, these holy people, they're happy to use these roads. I'm not going to stay away from them. Man niu Benan shel Kedoshim, who are these holy people, these sons of holy people? Rabbi Menachem b'Rabbi Simoi. Rabbi Menachem b'Rabbi Simoi is called Benan shel Kedoshim. V'amai karulei Benan shel Kedoshim. So why do they call him the sons of holy ones? Da'afilu b'tzurta dezuzah lo mistakel. He wouldn't even look at the image of a kohen. They used to make engravings and things, and on the coin, he didn't look at that. My time, it demanded parish. And then the Gemara goes on to explain what is the reason that those that didn't use the road, what's the reason for those that did use the road, which we won't go into now. Says Tosfos, why does it use Lashon Yachid? Why does it use the singular? Benan shel Kedoshim mahalech. Why doesn't it say mahalchim? The sons of Kedoshim, why is it Loshen Yochid? Why is it in the singular? It's talking about the sanctity, the Kedusha of the man himself, of Rabbi Menachem. It's not that his father was a Kodesh. Although they call him Benan Shel Kedoshim, the sons of holy ones, it doesn't mean his parents were holy. It means he was holy. And gives an example and a proof as to why that is. So why is he called Benan Shel Kedoshim? Two things we want to look at is firstly, why is he called Benan Shel Kedoshim? If we're talking about him, it should say Rabbi Menachem HaKodesh, Ben Rabbi Simoi. If we're talking about he was the holy man, why associate the holiness to his fathers? And secondly, what was so great that he didn't look at the image on a coin? Either way, a lot of people ask this question. If it was also, there are certain situations where an engraving, or the opposite of engraving, what's it called? A relief. An image which is in relief, one can't look at because of Avodah Zarah. There are certain cases when you can. Tosfos says in this case, because the coin is used a lot, there isn't the prohibition of looking at it. Either way, if it's also, if you're not allowed to, why is he a Kodesh? Why is he a holy person for not doing it? And if it's not also, why did he not look at it? What does this really mean? So firstly, there are two contradictory Gemaras. The one Gemara is in Sanhedrin that says, Bara mezaki abba, abba lo mezaki bro. A son can be mezakeh his father. If a son lives a good life, if a son does good things, the father gets credit in Olam Haba. But if the father does good things, the child doesn't get credit. It's the one Gemara. The other Gemara is in Yuma, Ashreim letzadikim lo dayan she'en zoichin elo shemezakin livneim ve'livnei b'neim ad sof kol hadoros. Tzadikim are so fortunate. Not only do they have zchus, not only do they have merit, but they give merit to their children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, until all generations. So these two Gemaras are completely at odds with one another. And what I think is important to understand is the difference between a father or an ancestor being able to instill certain character traits in their children. Character is something we inherit as well. Some people are born with a character. The Rambam talks about it in Shmoneh Prochim. We're born with different characters. Our job is to then take our characters and refine them and develop them and use them, just as we're born with different genes. We're born with different capacities. Some people are born able to be athletes, but they'll never be an athlete if they don't develop their athletic capability. Some people are born without the capacity to be an athlete. They can't possibly be an athlete, no matter how hard they try. We're born with different capacities physically, and we're born with different capacities spiritually. That's the Ashreim Tzadikim she'mezakin livneim v'livnei b'neihem. The character that a tzaddik has gets inherited by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we see that. We often see in the character of a person. You ask them about where they come from and who they are and who their parents, grandparents were, and you understand the schus, where these people come from. And that's when we talk about yichus, that's what we mean. However, Baro Mezaki Abba, Abba Lo Mezaki Bro, that's in actions. If a son does a mitzvah, the father gets benefit. A son says Kaddish. A son gives tzedakah. A son learns Torah. All the mitzvahs that a child does, the father gets chus. The father's in Olam Haba, and the Rebbe looks down and says, look at your son, all the wonderful things your son is doing. That's why we say Kaddish during the year of Avelis and on the Yortzites, is to do something extra, to do an additional mitzvah, and the father gets benefit. So that's Bro Mezaki Abba. In that case, what I would suggest to you here is that when Tosfos says, it's not that the father was a tzaddik, was a kodesh. He himself was a kodesh. So why does it call him Benan Shel Kedoshim? Because by his kedusha, let's understand what kedusha means. In a simple sense, kedusha means kedoshim to you, Rashi says, prushim to you. Kedusha comes when somebody restrains themselves from doing something that was wrong. We spoke yesterday about what it is to not do something. To destroy evil is doing good, even within oneself. If one restrains oneself from doing wrong, you're doing good. It's not just that you're not doing wrong. Not doing wrong is doing right. Destroying evil is is reinforcing goodness. And so a kodesh is a porish. If you hold yourself back from doing wrong, that's precious, and that's called kedusha, Rashi says. So this, that he stopped himself from looking even at the image on a coin. You're handling coins all the time. You're looking at coins all the time. That's an enormous level of self-discipline, of self-restraint. That's why he's a kodesh. And in matters of kedusha, hakol b'dei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim. One's yiras shamayim and one's kedusha, that's something one develops oneself. You don't inherit that. The character you develop, but the capacity each time you have an opportunity to do something wrong, to hold yourself back. And we're talking about watching one's eyes, what we look at, because our eyes are so impacted by what we see. And not just in matters of our eyes, but in all sorts of other things. Everything we see affects us very deeply. We can't not be affected by what we see. And he watches his eyes so carefully that he wouldn't even look at the tzura of a kohen, and that was the level of kedusha, and therefore his father benefits from that. Benan shel kedoshim, says Tosfos, he is the kodesh, he is the man of sanctity, but he's also the son of holy people who get sanctity because of his holy actions. His father's, that's why it's kedoshim, because it goes back in the plural, it goes back to all the generations. All of his ancestors, his parents and all of his ancestors get the merit of those acts of kedusha which Rabbi Menachem ben Simoy used to practice. There's another Gemara where he's referenced, and that's back in Arvei Psochim. I'm sure you all remember when we did Arvei Psochim, we had exactly the same situation. And there the discussion was when you make Havdalah. How many Havdolahs do you make? We mentioned different types of Havdalot, of differentiations between in the night and day, between Jew and Gentile, between Kodesh and Chol. We make these differentiations. It says the Gemara Tanoi here, how many Havdolahs you say is a Machlokes Tanoim. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said, Benan shel Kedoshim Omer Achat. Benan shel Kedoshim used to only say one, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'chol, that was it. No ben Yisrael Amim, ben Ol l'choshech, just one. Ben Hamavdil, God, praise God, who separates between Kodesh, between holy and secular. V'nagu hamlo ma shalosh, but most people say three. Man niyu benan shel Kedoshim, Rabbi Nachim, Rabbi Simoy. V'amai karulei benan shel Kedoshim. Who is this? It's our same Rabbi Menachem. Why do you call him benan shel Kedoshim? Because he didn't look at the tzura of a zuz. I want you to tell you the tzura of a zuz, the whole question of are you allowed to look at the image or aren't you allowed to look at the image? Tzura doesn't always mean an image. We've spoken about chomer and tzura, the idea of substance and form, design. Tzura is design. So when it says he didn't look at the tzura of a kohen, he didn't look at the design of a kohen. He didn't look whether it was an image or it wasn't an image. He didn't look at a kohen on the surface. And we find a very, very fascinating piece. There are lots and lots of things that are written. It was just a most beautiful experience last night and this morning, wandering through the various things that are written about this passing comment of the Gemara. But one of the things that I found was there on Daf Kuf Daled in Psochim from the Mea Shiloach. The Mea Shiloach is Rabbi Yosef Leiner. Rabbi Yosef Leiner was the Rajina Rebbe, the first Rajina Rebbe. He was a Talmud of Reb Simcha Bunim Ipshische, and he was a Talmud of the Kotzker Rebbe. Then he had a fallout with the Kotzker Rebbe, which wasn't unusual for people to have fallouts with the Kotzker Rebbe, and he started his own Chassidus. His grandson is the one who discovered Tcheles. So it's a well-known family, a Chassidish family, a Mekubalim, had a lot of Kabbalah. Look what he says. Inyan havdalah hu b'davar she'eino nikar v'nir'eh be'ein enoshi, ha'evdel v'ha'afresh b'nehem. The idea of havdalah, of discernment, of separation, is to discern between things that to the eye don't look different. That's what havdalah means, to be able to take things which to the eye seem to be the same thing, and yet if you understand them deeply, you understand they're not the same thing at all. That's what Havdalah means. Havdalah doesn't mean just discerning things that are obvious. So you say, why does it say Hamavdin ben Or l'choshech? If you know the difference between light and day, surely you know the difference between light and day. But what we mean is to understand the difference of light and day. As we say, the first bracha we make in the morning, we're talking about at the moment the cock crows. When you look outside, it's still dark, but the cock knows it's day. That's the moment of Havdalah we're talking about. Not, you gave us the ability to tell the difference between noon and midnight. Of course, anybody can tell that's not Koach Havdalah. Koach Havdalah is to be able to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and say, it's already dawn. Can't see a sign of light. To be able to feel internally that the day has already started, although there's no superficial sign of it. That's what we mean by Havdalah. Every Jew has this capacity. Lavchin ben kodesh l'chol. To be able to tell the difference between something that is holy and something that is secular. Every Jew, in principle, has that capacity. For the area that I've highlighted. And so in the Sugi in Psochim about how many Havdalot you make on when you say Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos and different Motzei Shabbos, how many examples do you give of discernment, of differences? And Benan Shel Kadoshim only says one. Ki ma shemosifin lomar Havdalot kasher lo zacha adam lerochav binato largish tochen ha'avdel tzarich levarer lo Havdalah if a person doesn't really get the difference between Kodesh and Chol, it helps to think about Or L'Choshech, Yisrael Lo'amim, the different kinds of Havdolahs help you understand the nature of Havdalah of Kodesh L'Chol. V'zeh shemivi kol sha'ad dvarim she'im tzulim gam kim b'argashot ha'adam ad shemivin davar la'eshuro. Sh'af shedomin ala levush yakir b'hem Havdalah. Even on the surface they look the same, they're not really the same. V'zeh shebenan shel kadoshin omer achas. So why does Rabbi Menachem only say one Havdalah? Hainu shehu lo hayat tzarich l'shum raya. He didn't need any additional examples. רק בהשקפה ראשונה מעניין זה עצמו שעומד בה היה מכיר ומבין הבדל וחילוק. He could immediately look at something and see, is it Kodesh or is it Chol? He could feel it, he could see it, he could understand that. וזה שאמר מני רבי מנחם רבי סימור, והמי קרא לבנן קדושים, דלא הסתכל בצורת הדזוזה. He didn't look at the form of a Kohen. היינו לא שנקרא כן על שם אבותיו, רק מהקדושת עצמו. As Tosfos says, it's not because of his fathers, it's as his own. שהיה מורגל בהקדושה. He understood Kedusha. וזהו דלא הסתכל בצורת הדזוזה שלא היה רואה כלום על הצורה ועל הלבוש ורק הבין הפנימיות. Because the way to understand the difference between Kodesh and Chol is not to look at the world superficially. On the surface, you won't see a difference between Kodesh and Chol. To understand Kedusha and the difference between Kodesh and Chol, you need to be able to look at something at its essence. You need to be able to penetrate to the essence of the thing or the idea or the person. Then you can get a sense. It's from your neshama to the neshama of the object. That's the point. That's where you're able to discern and to distinguish between something that is Kodesh or not. And he had that capacity even on a coin that one handles casually. You throw them out at people. Somebody comes for tzedakah, you take a coin out of your hand and you give it to him. No, he didn't look at a coin at its surface. He understood money at its essence. He understood coins at their essence. And from that you learn that he understood everything. When he looked at something, he looked at it with X-ray eyes. We learned in the Medrash on Shabbos the importance in the Tisha B'Av Shur, we looked about the importance of not being an Esav. An Esav operates with exteriority on the surface. It's not just your own surface, whereas what we need to do is to be matspin. We talked about you've got to operate in interiority, hide the external and develop and focus the internal. It's not just that we have to focus on our own internal and build our own interiority, but to see the world internally. Look at the people around you internally. Connect with their neshama, see their souls. And not just of people, but of things as well. Even a coin that you handle casually, see its soul. Because that's why he says only one Havdalah. He can immediately tell if something is Kodesh L'Chol because he sees beneath the surface. He doesn't look at the tzura. He doesn't look at the design. He doesn't look at the surface. He looks at the essence. So that capacity that we talked about when one's learning Torah, to be able to be mavdil, to be mechalik, to be able to understand differences, that you can't just apply one thing from one place and apply it to another place. To understand the differences is not just a mental capacity. It's also the development of character, the ability to be an Adam Kodesh, to live a life of Kedusha. And what is living a life of Kedusha means? Holding yourself back from seeing the world superficially. That's the hardest thing to hold oneself back from, particularly nowadays, in the times in which we live. Kedusha is precious, is holding yourself back. What's the gut thing? What do you do naturally? What do you do instinctively? You look at the world as it is. You look at the surface. You're looking at the things around you. A Kodesh is able to hold himself back and not look at what you see on the surface, but always to look beneath the surface to the Shoresh HaDvorim, to the root, to the underlying essence of everything around him, and there to be able to perceive the difference, many differences, and among them the difference between Kodesh and Chol, that which is secular and general and ordinary, and that which has sanctity and Kedusha.